What if Alex Mason didn't actually escape the numbers program? Because at the end of Call of Duty Black Ops, Dragovich is dead. The numbers station is shut down. The mission is over. Mason should finally be free. But then the game cuts to Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. And standing in that crowd is Alex Mason, the exact man Dragovich had programmed to assassinate President Kennedy. Now, the game never outright tells us Mason killed JFK, but it leaves us with something much more disturbing. Mason was there. And after everything we've just watched him go through, that raises one question. What if killing Dragovich didn't erase what he did to Mason's mind? What if the programming was still there, buried somewhere inside him? And what if that final scene wasn't showing us the end of Mason's story, but the one part of it he still couldn't remember? What if Mason was never fully deprogrammed? Let's go back to where it all started. To understand that ending, we have to go back to Vorkuta. Because Mason wasn't just tortured there, he was programmed. Dragovich and Steiner wanted to turn him into a sleeper agent. The idea was simple. Mason hears the correct numbers, and the programming activates. His target? President John F. Kennedy. But there was a problem. Mason wasn't completely under their control, and that's where Reznov comes in. Reznov discovers what they're doing to Mason and basically hijacks the programming for himself. Instead of allowing Mason to become Dragovich's weapon, Reznov gives him a different purpose. Dragovich, Kravchenko, Steiner. 3 names Mason must eliminate. And that's exactly what happens. Except there's one massive problem. Reznov dies during the Vorkuta escape, meaning the man Mason believes is guiding him for years is actually inside his own mind. Hudson eventually explains it. Mason's memories aren't reliable. There are gaps. There are missing periods. And the brainwashing isn't simply something that disappears. That's important, because it means Mason's mind has already been altered on a level even Mason doesn't completely understand. Now we reach the part that most people remember. Rebirth Island, Steiner. Mason thinks Reznov is there. He watches Reznov execute Steiner, except that's not what actually happened. Hudson and Weaver saw the truth. Mason was the one who did it. Mason had completely taken on Reznov's identity in that moment, and that's when Hudson finally tells him the truth. Reznov has been dead for years. Mason has been seeing him because of what was done to his mind. But here's where things get interesting. Hudson doesn't say, "Your brainwashing is completely gone." He explains that Mason has gaps in his memory. That lost time may come back. And that Mason is the only person who can decode the numbers, so Mason's mind is still the key to the entire operation. That's why they keep playing the numbers to him. And eventually, Mason remembers. The Rusalka, the source of the broadcast, which leads directly to the final mission. But notice something. Mason successfully remembers what the CIA needs without us ever getting confirmation that every piece of Dragovich's original programming has been removed. And that distinction is everything. And eventually, Mason reaches Dragovich, the man responsible for everything. Vorkuta, the numbers program, Nova 6, the sleeper agents, the manipulation of Mason's mind. And Dragovich has one last thing to say. Mason confronts him about trying to make him kill Kennedy. And Dragovich responds, "Tried?" That's it. One word. But that word completely changes the ending. Because Dragovich isn't saying, "I failed." He's questioning Mason, almost as if Mason himself doesn't know the answer. And then Mason kills him. The numbers broadcast is shut down. The immediate threat is over. But the game never gives us a scene where Mason is medically examined and declared completely free from the programming. There is no scene saying, the Kennedy programming is gone. Instead, we get Dallas. Then comes the ending. Archival footage of JFK arriving in Dallas, and the camera slowly moves toward the crowd, until we see him. Mason. The man who was supposedly just fighting to save America was apparently standing in Dallas. And over the footage, Mason starts repeating information connected to the assassination. November 22nd, Texas, 6.5 millimeter. And then, Ascension. Now here's where the theory begins. The game doesn't explicitly show Mason carrying out the assassination. It doesn't give us a scene where Mason pulls the trigger, but it gives us something arguably more disturbing. It shows us that Mason was physically there. It reminds us that he had been programmed to kill Kennedy. And it shows us that years later, his mind is still connected to the numbers. So what if the ending isn't telling us Mason killed Kennedy? What if it's asking, did Mason ever actually escape Dragovich's programming? Because those are two very different questions. Now, before we call this confirmed, there's a huge problem. Because the game never actually confirms that Mason assassinated JFK. Mason being present doesn't automatically mean he carried out the assassination, and his memories have already been proven unreliable. So technically, we cannot say Mason definitely killed Kennedy. What we can say is that Black Ops deliberately puts Mason in Dallas after spending the entire campaign telling us he had been programmed to kill Kennedy. And then it leaves us with Dragovich's final question. That's not a coincidence. It's a mystery. And honestly, that's what makes Black Ops ending so good. It doesn't give you every answer. It gives you enough information to make you question the answer you thought you had. The numbers station is gone. Nova 6 has been stopped. But Mason? Mason is still standing. For now.